iPad app crashed for whatever reason when I was starting to share. So let's do this. We're now in the city of David. This is the rendering of the city of David for the first temple time period. And the first quote, we're going to work a lot with the Bible this lecture. So the first story I want to share with you is the first reference about Jerusalem is in Genesis chapter 14, where it talks about Melchizedek, king of Shalem. If you guys are able to grab your Bibles, please have them with you. Open in Genesis 14. Melchizedek, we believe he was Shem, the son of Noach. Jerusalem is called Shalem. Hotzi lechem v'yain, brought out bread and wine, and he was the priest to the Most High God. This is when Abraham is coming back from the battle with the kings to retrieve his cousin Lot all the way up to Damascus. He comes back, retrieves them, and on his way back, he meets Melchizedek and Mount Moriah, and that's where Melchizedek, the priest and the king, blesses him, and he says, "Vayivarechev vayomar Baruch Avraham le'el elyon, koneh shamayim va'aretz." Blessed is Abraham to the Almighty, the creator of the sky and the creator of the earth. This is the first reference. If we go further, you can see the topographical layout of Jerusalem. Jerusalem is in between the mountains. We'll go soon to a reference in the book of Psalms, but you can see here, Jerusalem is surrounded by mountains, and you can see this in this topographical rendering. And when Abraham is coming in our next encounter, 8 chapters later, you can see here in Genesis chapter 22, there's a story about Abraham in the ultimate test that God asked him to do. And that's, of course, the test of sacrificing his only son. And in Genesis chapter 22, it says, God is testing Abraham. Abraham answers them, take your only son, your beloved son Isaac, and go and sacrifice him on one of the mountains I'll point out to you. What I'm sharing with you right now is an actual picture, which I have in my possession, from one of the famous artists, painters from the 17th century in Amsterdam. This is a Rembrandt. And Rembrandt sketched that scene, and you can see in the scene, Abraham responding to his son. The original is in Amsterdam. I got the actual imprint from the original bronze plate. I have it framed in my house now. And when you look carefully at this picture, it seems that Abraham is speaking to his son, and the son looks very young, maybe 8, 10, 12. But the real age of Isaac, we know, was 37 years old. As Sarah gave birth when she was 90, Abraham was 100, and Sarah died immediately after she heard about this event in the age of 127, and that's how we can actually calculate Isaac's age. Isaac was 37 years old. So in fact, Rembrandt was wrong in this picture. But you can see here there's many renderings, many pictures of this idea. Abraham is coming to a mountain, an empty mountain. There's no temple yet, there's nothing. And he's going through the ultimate test, the ultimate challenge, to take his only beloved son Isaac from Sarah and to offer him on one of the mountains that God points out to him. He wakes up early in the morning, leaves Beersheba, arrives the third day. It says, Vayisa Avraham et enav, vayar et hamakom merachok. Abraham is looking from a distance, and he sees the place from a distance. He tells his servants, stay here with the donkey, we will go, we will pray, and we will come back towards you. What happens next is they go together. That picture where you see the father and son walking together, and Isaac is asking his father a question. He says, Daddy, here's the fire, here's the knife, where's the sacrifice? And as they continue walking together, Abraham tells them, God will provide. Elokim yir'elo haseh le'olah bni. As they continue walking, Abraham is binding his son on the altar. He reaches out to the knife to go all the way through with this ultimate test and commitment. Suddenly he hears the angel of God calling him, Avraham, Avraham, al tishlach yadcha el anar ve'al ta'aslo me'uma. Abraham, Abraham, do not touch the boy, do not hurt him, as now I know that you are fully committed. And right away, Abraham sees a ram stuck with his antlers in one of the bushes. He goes and he sacrifices the ram instead of his son Isaac. This is the first reference made to Jerusalem. Unfortunately, there's no archaeological finds from that time, but just to put things in context and in terms of the chronological layout of this lecture, this is the beginning point. We mentioned Genesis 14, Abraham is being blessed by Melchizedek on his way back from the north. 8 chapters later, the ultimate sacrifice and what tied the Jewish people and believers from around the world to this city, Jerusalem, Shalem Moriah, this event of the binding of Isaac. Now we're jumping actually several hundred years ahead. God tells Abraham, your offspring, your sons, your children will be enslaved for 400 years. And now we have an important question which will help us understand the finds in the chronology. And that's, I would say, in the archaeological research, the $1 million question. What is or was the date of the biblical Exodus? Quite a question, right? And there's many references and there's many opinions, but I'm going to suggest a certain idea for the biblical Exodus. But before we do that, I want to tell you something about Jerusalem. Right now, I'll tell you that the biblical Exodus was the year 1446, and in a few minutes, we will go through together why that is, in fact, the date. But the biblical Exodus brought 40 years travel in the desert. And the 40 years was an outcome of one of the worst sins that the Jewish people, mainly its leaders, sinned when Moses sent 12 spies to tour for 40 days. And these spies are going around for 40 days touring Israel, bringing the cluster of grapes, giving a report, a positive report, that the land is blessed and the land is fortified. The problem was not with the report, the problem was with their demoralization, and the problem was with the fact that they completely went against God and Moses, trying to discourage the people from coming into Israel. But in the context of this lecture, I want you to see this picture, because one of the things that the spies reported was fortification. And this is our first anchor when we talk about the archaeological finds in the Bible. This is a rendering of the spring house in the Gihon Spring, around the Gihon Spring in the Kidron Valley. And before David fortified it, the Jebusites living in Jerusalem, the city of ancient Jebus, ancient Jerusalem, was built around the spring. It was actually built around the spring. That was also the weak link. That was the most difficult thing to protect. And that's why there was heavy fortifications. In fact, in the city of David today, we found massive fortifications that go from the level of the valley all the way to the top, 120 feet, 40 meters high. And we can imagine that the spies actually toured under this fortification, this massive building, and they reported what they saw with this massive building. So now the question is, why did they spend 40 days? 40 days was the right amount of time to cover the land of Israel, but the 40 repeats itself directly with a punishment, because the reason that the people of Israel, in fact, spent 40 years is because it says Yom Lashana. First of all, here's the testimonies from the book of Numbers, chapter 13. Efes ki az ha'am hayoshev ba'aretz ve'arim betzurot, and cities which are fortified. So they reported what they saw, but then take a look what it says here in chapter 14, okay? After the number of the days in which you spied out the land, even 40 days, for every day a year shall be your punishment. So we're talking about 40 years in the desert, Yom Lashana. And now we're coming back to the question we raised several minutes ago. And the question was, how did we get to the year of 1446 BCE? That's a very interesting topic. And the way to do it, we'll use the Bible and archaeology to find the exact date. Right now, I'm giving to you as a fact, even though there's no fact when it comes to ideas around dates. But this is the date I figured out for the exact Gorgian date for the biblical Exodus. And here is the mathematics. The year is 1446, 40 years in the desert, okay, which puts the year 1406, the year of the entry into the Promised Land. We all know, historically, that the tabernacle in Shiloh was existing and functioning for 369 years. King Saul ruled in 1037. King David right after him at 1006 BCE. King Solomon ruled in the year 970, and King Rehoboam 930. Now you'll see how this is going to be very helpful, because now we're using the anchors from the Bible to figure out this date. It says in the book of Kings 1, chapter 14, verse 25, ויהי בשנה החמישית למלך רחבעם עלה שישק מלך מצרים על ירושלים. In the 5th year of King Rehoboam, a king from Egypt by the name of Shishak made a journey to Jerusalem and took the spoils from the temple. The same event is also described in the Bible and also in external Egyptian sources, and the date is anchored from external sources, not from the Bible, in the year 925 BCE, before Common Era. Therefore, that is an anchor that can help us calculate the biblical Exodus. How do we do it? Very simple. If it's the 5th year of King Rehoboam, that Shishak came, and we know to put on the time graph that the year is 925 BCE, there you go. Okay, so what you do is, King Rehoboam ruled in 930, go to the bottom of the slide, okay? Minus 5 years, so 925, you're able to check it from the bottom. And King Solomon ruled for 40 years. So to 930, you add 40 years, you come to 970. But how do you get to the biblical Exodus? This is where it gets really interesting. This is in the book of Kings 1, chapter 6, verse 1, where it says, ויהי ב-80 שנה ו400 שנה לצאת בני ישראל מארץ מצרים, בשנה הרביעית בחודש זו, החודש השני למלך שלמה על ישראל, ויבן הבית לאדוני. It gives us the exact date. It came to pass 480 years after the children of Israel came out of Egypt. In the 4th year of Solomon's reign, that's where he built the temple. So this is a reference that if we are able to anchor down Shishak's journey, 925, add 5 years to the reign of Rehoboam, 930, Solomon ruled for 40 years, therefore he started to rule in the year 970. And here in this verse it says, in the 4th year of his rule, so from 970, it's 966 BC. And here is the beginning of the verse, it came to pass in the 480th year after the children of Israel came out of Egypt. And here you do a simple mathematics drill. You take the year right over here of Solomon's rule, or 966 BC, add 480, and you're able to come to this date of 1446 BCE. After we cleared that, now we can actually go to the temple that Solomon built. This is a rendering, reconstruction of the first temple, and now we're jumping back into the archaeology. Take a look at this picture. In this picture, you can see an aerial picture of the city of David, the southern wall of the Temple Mount. You can notice the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock in the location where the first and second temple existed, the same exact location. And very clearly in the right part of the picture is the valley of Kidron, okay? So take a look at this rendering. You can see the deep topography layout, very deep ravines on the right, on the east, which is the Kidron Valley, known also as the Valley of Jehoshaphat. And on the left, west, is the Valley of the Teropeon, Emek Osag Vinod, the cheese-making valley. And Jerusalem is very well surrounded. And you remember the most vulnerable place of Jerusalem is the spring, which is in the slopes of city of David, sloping in towards the Kidron Valley. Okay, you can see another picture from the south. We can see the layout of the city of David, the Kidron Valley to the east, the Teropeon Valley to the left, and the Temple Mount as it is today to the north. This is the picture from the east where you can see the layout on the slopes of the mountain of the city of David, sloping all the way down. This is an interesting picture from 1925 showing how the ground was all fields, farms, agriculture, but there was still not any excavations yet. And that's why we're going to go and dive deep into the actual archaeological finds, just imagining that these finds were found under these hills, under these fields of farmers growing cucumbers or growing any kind of vegetables, and there is secrets hiding right underneath these hills, 10, 20, 30 feet below. There's a picture from 1925, before they discovered the southern wall excavation of the Temple Mount and the city of David. This is another angle, more from the area of St. Peter and Gallicanto, also from the southwest. You can see the slopes, the southern slopes of Moriah. Again, old terraces, farming, agriculture, very few houses on the slopes, but no excavations whatsoever. And again, one more picture showing you the similar status of Jerusalem before the excavations. In the book of Psalms 125:2, it says, as the mountains are round about Jerusalem, Yerushalayim Harim Savivla. When people come to Jerusalem, they always think, oh, it's probably going to be the highest mountain. But no, when you stand in Jerusalem, in Moriah, you can see that there are still mountains higher, such as the Jewish Quarter, such as Mount of Olives from the east. And of course, when you're in the city of David, you're actually in a deeper part, surrounded by mountains from the west, east, and north, and the city slopes down. In this rendering, you can also notice the heavy fortifications around the spring building. So going now back to King David. King David, which came from the tribe of Yehudah, he was the second king after Shaul. After King Saul violated the terms, he was secretly anointed David by Samuel. Saul did not obey God's manual. He did not destroy Amalek. He spared the king, he spared the people, where he tells Shmuel when he comes to visit him after the war, Shmuel asks him, Samuel, what is this voice I'm hearing? Of sheep, of cattle. And Saul says to Samuel, well, the people were merciful. And Samuel took out his sword, killed the king, the Amalekite king Agag, and Benjamin lost, and Judah took the lead. The first king was from Benjamin, second king was from Judah, and we're talking about King David. And you can see Jerusalem is similar in a sense to Washington, D.C. It doesn't belong to any tribe. In fact, David, you'll see soon, had to capture it. It was still left for nearly 400 years since they entered, untouched. If they entered in 1406 BC, only in 1006, 400 years later, is when King David came after he ruled for 7.5 years in Hebron. Take a look at this. We're now going to the book of Samuel, chapter 5, Samuel to chapter 5, describing the rule of King David. Ben 30 shana David b'molcho, 40 shana malach. David was only 30 years old when he started to rule, and he ruled for 40 years total. He died in the age of 70. Bechevron malach al Yehudah 7 shanim. He started to rule in Hebron 7 years and 6 months, and in Jerusalem he ruled for 33 years. In chapter 5, verse 7, it says, and David captured the fortress of Zion and named it the city of David. And now we have something very interesting, going back to the topic of our lecture. And the topic of our lecture, again, is archaeological correlations with the story of the Bible. In the next verse, it says as follows, Vayomer David bayom ha'u, kol makei vusi v'iga betzino. Okay? You take a look at this slide. And David said, on that day, whoever smites the Jebusite and gets up the gutter, the water pipe, some kind of water channel, we don't know exactly what it is. For many years, we were archaeologists, guides, under the impression that David, General Yoav, actually used the water channel, what is known as Pir Warren, the Warren shaft. You can see it in this slide, okay? This is the shaft known as the Warren shaft in the center of the slide over here. And only later on we learned that only in the days of King Hezekiah, several hundred years after King David, is when they made it deeper. You can see there's actually 2 layers of color in the slide. So in fact, the Warren shaft wasn't accessible to Yoav. Nevertheless, we believe that the reference we just read over here about anyone that strikes the Jebusites and goes through the gutter has to do with the water pipe, with the channel. So here we are, the water system. Remember, this was the most vulnerable thing of the city, and that's probably what Yoav, the general, used to penetrate the city and to eventually take over through this water system. And here we have King David sitting in his palace. This is a rendering showing you David looking from his palace towards the south. The city is laid out below him, so the roofs are actually below. But the interesting thing about this rendering, which was put together, is the capitals. And this is another important anchor for us when we talk about the topic of our lecture, which is the archaeological correlations of the finds in Jerusalem, city of David, namely, and biblical scripture. And here it is. Take a look. If anybody of you has a 5 shekel coin, obviously people in Israel can just grab one. If you're listening to this lecture from abroad, I don't know if you're having access to a 5 shekel coin, but keep one with you. It's always handy also for the supermarket in Israel. The back of the 5 shekel coin has this capital of a Phoenician capital. Phoenicia is in the coast of Lebanon, okay? And the question we ask ourselves, how was the influence? How did they make the connection between Lebanon, which is about 250 miles north of Jerusalem, all the way to Jerusalem? And here we have it. If we open the Bible, because the Bible has it all, we open the Bible, the book of Samuel, chapter 5, Samuel to chapter 5, it says as following. וישלח חרם מלך צור מלאכים אל דוד, ועצר עזים, וחרשי עץ וחרשי אבן, קיר ויבנו בית לדוד. And Hiram, the king of Tyre is in Lebanon, I'll show you a map shortly, sent messengers to David and cedar trees and carpenters and masons, and they build David a house. Take a look at this map over here. You can see Tyre all the way in the northern coast of Lebanon, in the northern part, and look at the Jerusalem, how far away it is. So how was the connection made? And now we come to the story of the discovery of this tile. In the year 2005, there was an archaeologist by the name of Eilat Mazar. Back then a doctor, today a professor. She was the granddaughter of Professor Benjamin Mazar, which was the one to excavate the Southern Wall excavations after 67. And she comes to Davidale, the founder of Elad Foundation, City of David, and she tells him, Davidale, I think I know where David's palace is. And Davidale said, well, that would be amazing. I mean, that would be hitting the jackpot. Can you imagine in the city of David to find the actual palace of King David? Well, in fact, he asks her, what are you basing this on? And she said, well, I found a capital which was rolled down below a certain area. I believe it fell from a certain point, which is happily, inconveniently located underneath your offices in your visitor center. So it took a lot of, boldness to do it, but they had to relocate the visitor center and the office, go through a process of very expensive process of millions of dollars, and to excavate underneath the entrance of the visitor center. And what do you know? They found a second capital. But finding these capitals, right, and finding this reference, it made it complete. Of course, in court, this thing would be circumstantial evidence. This is not the smoking gun. This is not the solid evidence saying, okay, this is David's palace, but it's good enough for us to make the connection and to say, this is an actual thing found and with 100% consistency with the Bible. And that was the starting point. But this is only the beginning, guys. It gets even better. It gets much better. Because after they started the excavations of the palace, right, David brought out the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem, right? And that's another thing which we'll relate to later in the lecture. But the Ark of the Covenant, which is an entirely different story, unfortunately, I'm not going to tell you the secrets where the Ark of the Covenant is. One, because we don't know where it is. I happen to have a theory of my own, but that's going to be for a different lecture with the Reshit Jerusalem. David brings the Ark of the Covenant after it fell and it was held in the hands of the Philistines. In fact, they took it from Shiloh. Then the Philistine gods, fake god statues fell in front of it. That's a rendering in the 5 cities of the Philistines. The Philistines send it back. They put it on 2 bulls and send it back and the people in Bet Shemesh saw the ark coming. That's, by the way, a stone. It's not Jerusalem, but this was a stone which was recently found in the archaeological excavations of Bet Shemesh. And we believe that this is the stone where the ark was placed on when it was sitting in Bet Shemesh for several months until it was moved there to Kiryat Yarim for 20 years, and later on to the house of Oved, the Edomite, nearby Jerusalem. So this is the stone. Again, this is on Route 38. When you come to it, you should visit that site. It's not open yet, really, and set for visitors, but it's a magnificent archaeological site. And maybe that this stone that you're looking at right now is the stone where the Ark of the Covenant was sitting on when he came back to Bet Shemesh. David brings it up. He sacrifices a bull every few feet. He dances in front of the ark. He puts it in Jerusalem, but the ark is being placed in a tent. And then David comes to Nathan the prophet and he says to him, I'm reading from Samuel 2, chapter 7, verse 2. David tells Nathan the prophet, see now, I dwell in the house of cedar. Remember, the house of cedar from Lebanon that Hiram sent with the masons and carpenters to build, a beautiful mansion, but the Ark of the Covenant of God is sitting in the curtain, in a tabernacle, in a small tent. The Ark that contained the 10 Commandments, the broken and the complete one. The Ark that contained the staff of Aaron, the jar of the manna. That Ark is sitting in a tent, and David wants to build the temple in Jerusalem. But God tells him, you cannot build a temple. You're involved with too many wars. Therefore, only your son Solomon, he will have the merit to build a temple. Nevertheless, David does something very important. In the last chapter of Samuel 2, chapter 24, it says that David made a real estate deal to buy the Temple Mount. The same place that Abraham visited Melchizedek in Genesis 14, same place that Abraham offered the binding of Isaac in Genesis 22, and the place which was right now neglected, above, higher than the palace of the king. David is purchasing it, and he buys it for 50 shkalim. Now, I didn't say silver coins, because that would be misleading, but shekel in Hebrew does not mean coin or a currency. Literally, the word shekel means weight. Shekel equals weight, mishkal. And even when Abraham bought the cave of the patriarchs in the book of Genesis from Ephron, he paid 400 shekel kesef, 400 shekel kesef. So that's a measure of weight and not a measure of quantity of coins. Later on, coins were invented about 500 years after King David's time in the Persian time. But in this reference, there's a real estate deal. David is buying with a deed the Temple Mount from King Arvana for a weight equivalent to 50 silver weight of whatever that was equivalent in that time. Now, we're coming to the real smoking gun. When we go to the actual epigraphic reference, it's nice to find pottery, it's nice to find walls, it's nice to find capitals, as we spoke about before. But the best thing an archaeologist can find is, of course, any kind of writing. Why is writing so important? Because the writing gives us so much understanding. It's like an open book. Imagine if you find someone's iPhone, right? You know everything about his life. Finding writing shows you the actual names, and you can learn so much from it. And here in this case, we found a tremendous rich find of imprints of seals known as bula, which is the imprint of the seal and seals themselves. On the right-hand corner of the slide, you can see the actual seal of Hezekiah Achaz Melech Yehuda, King Hezekiah, the king which is contemporary to Prophet Isaiah, which we'll get to in a second. By the way, his seal was a sun with wings. If it reminds anything for us, it reminds the book of Malachi chapter 3, where it says, Shemesh tzedakah v'marpeh beknafeh, a righteous sun with healing wings. That was his actual, and we know that Hezekiah had 15 years of healing that he got as a gift from God. He was very sick, and God granted him another 15 years. So imagine, guys, we found the actual seal with the name of Hezekiah Achaz Melech Yehuda. Another interesting seal that we found is the seal of Yoachal, son of Shalmiah. Before we get to that, and again, there are several seals here, all of which, of course, are in the Bible. This is, by the way, another beautiful picture of a seal, as you can see, of Hezekiah with a sun with the healing wings, and the name of it is Hezekiah Achaz Melech Yehuda. And in this slide, you can see one next to another, both the seal of Hezekiah as well as the seal of Isaiah. This is the Hebrew name of Ishayahu, and he was the contemporary prophet to Hezekiah. So finding two solid archaeological artifacts with the king and the prophet, one of the most famous prophets in the Bible, Prophet Isaiah, which came in and out of the palace and spoke with the king. We found these. Take a look at this verse. This is the first verse in chapter 1 of Isaiah. When you have both Isaiah and Hezekiah referred to in the same verse, Chazon Ishayahu ben Amotz, Asher Chazal Yehuda v'Yerushalayim b'mei Uziyahu Yotam Achaz Yechizkiyahu Melech Yehuda. Both the name Isaiah, the prophet, and Hezekiah are mentioned in verse 1 of the book of Isaiah. That's the actual size of the fingernail of an imprint of a seal, that bulla. And what was the seals for? The seals were for the actual letters. The letters, of course, did not last for 2,700 years because they're made from papyrus, which disintegrates in the humidity conditions of Jerusalem. So besides the Dead Sea Scrolls found in the desert, but they date from the 2nd, 3rd century BC, they found these seals, but they did not find the actual letters because that's, of course, disintegrated. One of the best places to give an example to Bible lovers where it's very clearly mentioned, the story of the seals, is in the book of Esther. In the book of Esther, we have the story of Ahasuerus, the Persian king, where he takes off his ring and he gives it to Haman, the villain, right? He takes it off and it's authority. You can do whatever you want in my signature, in my name. That's my authority. And that's what it means to have the king seal, the king ring, and of course, any letters. Accordingly, there's much more layers and depth to it, but you can only imagine, and that's how a letter looked like, sealed, usually with one seal, not four, but this is a nice idea how it looked like. Now we're going back to another very important, we're going to go back to the seals, I promise, and talk about two important ones. But because I promised you in the beginning of the lecture to keep it a chronological lecture, okay, it's important for me to go through the chronology properly and not to jump back and forth. And that's why I'm jumping to another incredible story, which has to do to Hezekiah, to Isaiah, in one of the most incredible, probably the pinnacle of the Holy Triangle of finding the reference of archaeological, solid confirmation with the biblical historical story. Again, we're going back to the fortified spring house of the Gichon, the vulnerable part of Jerusalem. After Tiglath-Pileser in 722 started the siege and exiled the 10 tribes, succeeded by Sancheriv, king of Assyria. Sancheriv destroys the Judean cities, namely Lachish and others, and comes to Jerusalem. As a preparation for that siege, Hezekiah fortifies the city, builds it with towers, with walls, but the main project known for Hezekiah's doing is the famous water tunnel. I invite all of you guys, if you're in Israel, if you're abroad, when you are back in Jerusalem after these crazy days of coronavirus, to come to the city of David and to literally walk through this incredible tunnel, get your feet wet. It's just a refreshing, incredible, and moving experience. This is the layout of the actual tunnel, which was done from both sides. In fact, not just that we found the tunnel and today we can walk through the tunnel. This is a picture of the entrance of the source of the Gichon spring. On a personal note, the day I got married, that's where I dipped. That's where I did my mikveh, my baptism, to be holy, to be pure. It was incredible, really refreshing and holy, feeling of dipping in the actual place where King Solomon was anointed to be the king of Israel. That is the beginning of the tunnel. And this is the actual incredible archaeological find found in 1892, a random stumble of a local, an Arab, visiting that exit of the cave on the other side near the Byzantine part. And he sees this inscription trying to take it out, unfortunately damaging it, breaking it into 4 pieces, as you can see here. This is again the picture. 12 years ago, I had the privilege to see it, the actual original one, which is in the museum in Istanbul, not in a very important place. This is an inscription, of course, needs to be in Jerusalem, but the Turks are holding it because it was found during the Ottoman period. What this inscription says is, Tama hanikeva, the tunneling is done, בעוד מניפים החוצבים את הגרזני של רעהו, as the couriers are lifting the axe, pickaxe against pickaxe, ובעוד 3 אמות להינקב, נשמע כל איש קורא אל אחיו. A voice was heard from one side to another. כי הייתה זדה בצור, there was a zada in the rock. What's the word zada? We don't know. We assume it was probably a crack, which they enlarged, and the water went flowing from one side to another, 1,200 cubits. So we found the actual tunnel. We found the actual inscription. We found the Bible speaking about this. This is in Chronicle chapter 32, where it says, they sealed all of the springs. Why would the king of Assyria come and find your water? So they sealed and diverted it to a secure source. But the main reference is in Chronicles 2, chapter 32, verse 30, where it says, King Hezekiah, Satam et motzam ime Gichon Elyon, sealed up the upper Gichon spring, Vayashram lemata ma'arav al Ir David, and diverted them down and west to the city of David, and Hezekiah was successful in all of his works. So we have a reference about this, but this, guys, is where it gets really, really interesting. Because we talked about the actual tunnel, we talked about the actual archaeological find with the inscription, we just showed you the reference, we know the historical context, but we have another 4th external find, which was found in Lachish. This is a rendering of the palace in Nineveh. In fact, there's 3 of these astelas. This is, by the way, the empire of the Assyrians, as you can see, the Assyrian Empire. The purple is Solomon's kingdom, later on shrink to Hezekiah's kingdom after the 10 tribes were exiled. And this is where Nineveh is today. In the map, it's in Iraq. So the blue here is Jerusalem, and Nineveh is near Mosul today, okay? In modern Iraq, that's where Nineveh is. And this is where one of them were found. This is a picture of Minseret Sancheriv, this Estela of Sancheriv. In fact, there are 3 of them, one in the British Museum, one in Chicago, and one in Jerusalem. Again, I'm going through this fast, but you can see I highlighted what it says in one of them. As for Hezekiah, this is an external source found in archaeology in Mosul, in Nineveh, in Iraq, describing Hezekiah, the king of Judea, which was captured, Hezekiah himself, like a caged bird, I shut up in Jerusalem, his royal city. So you have an actual reference in archaeology, in Assyrian language, found in Nineveh, referring to this. So this is really the holy, I would say, not even triangle, because we have 4 elements, 4 solid feet of the Bible, the side, the tunnel you can walk through, the actual inscription done by the diggers, and of course the Bible describing it, and this external incredible archaeological find in Nineveh, Iraq. Now, I promised you we're going to go back to the Bulla, right? To these imprints. These imprints, when they found them several years ago, Eilat Mazar called my dear friend Doron Spielman. She said to him, Doron, are you sitting? He said, go and get a Bible and sit down. He says, okay, I'm sitting. Open it in Jeremiah 37. And she said, we found an imprint of a seal with the name of it of Yoachal ben Shalmiah ben Shevi. Joachal son of Shalmiah. Now, for many of us, this name means nothing. There's thousands of names in the Bible. But this name appears in the book of Jeremiah, chapter 37, as a reference of a person which was in the first circle of the administration of King Zedekiah. And Zedekiah the king sent Joachal, the son of Shalmiah, to prophet Jeremiah. This Joachal, we just saw his seal, this Joachal was sent by Zedekiah the king, last king of Judea, to Jeremiah the prophet. The next bullet which we found, just nearby it, was another individual with the name of Gedaliah ben, means son of Pashhur. In Jeremiah 38, we have this person again, but in this case it's even more interesting because both of the individuals, both Gedaliah ben Pashhur and Joachal, son of Shalmiah, both appear together in the same verse. But not just that, guys, because these two people were the people that took Jeremiah and casted him into the cistern. Then they took Jeremiah and cast him into the pit, okay, in the Matara square near the king's palace. And Jeremiah started to drown. We actually found this cistern. There's a picture of it when I went down to it. It's about 30 feet away from the palace. So it's really close proximity, nearby the courtyard, Chatzara Matara. These are pictures I took from the cistern itself, believed to be the actual cistern of where Jeremiah was casted in. And if some of you were paying attention, you probably saw peeking the picture of the White House. I'll get to that in a second. It didn't slip here by mistake. I want to go back to these people. These people which we found, the bullets of Gedaliah son of Pashhur and Yochai ben Shalmiah. These are two of the high officials from the administration of King Zedekiah, the last king of Judea. Now, if anybody's in real estate, you know when you have an apartment, if you rent it to 10 different tenants, you're most likely not going to find anything from the first, second, or third tenant. Most likely you will find any remnants of memories from the last or the one before last tenant. And you see where I'm going with this. When we found the destroyed palace of King David, we did not find seals from King David's time. We did not. Unfortunately, we did not. But keep in mind, if this was a palace which was used for several hundred years, every king comes, renovates, and brings his stuff in. We did find these seals in the palace of the administration of the last king of Judea, King Zedekiah, with Yochai son of Shalmiah, Gedaliah ben Pashhur, the two guys that casted Jeremiah into that cistern that we just saw. And the reference is very interesting because for some of you that you saw the White House, I always like to give that example because in our historical understanding is we know that the White House is the former residency of the US presidents. Regardless if you like or dislike the person sitting in the White House, we know that Trump was sworn in. He had to downgrade from living in the Trump Towers and he had to move to the White House. But we also know, because we live in this generation, that the same physical White House was the building where George W. Bush was there before him, and Clinton, and before that, Reagan, and Bush the father, and Jimmy Carter, and Nixon, and Ford, and going all the way back to 1813. You see where I'm going with this. Which means we have no reason to believe that the palace that we found, which we confirm almost beyond a doubt, which was the palace of the last king of Judea, King Zedekiah, was also the same original palace that we started the lecture with, that was built by the help of Hiram, king of Tyre, sending the masons and the cedar trees to be the house of King David, where he wrote Psalms in. And he later on passed it over to his son Solomon, which passed it to his son Rehoboam, and was passed on down the generation to Hezekiah and all the way down to King Zedekiah. So this is the idea. And now we're going to another important reference, and this is the reference of another incredible archaeological find, and this is the find, another correlation between archaeology and Bible. What you see over here is a rendering, a reconstruction of the typical four-quarter Israeli home. Okay, it's called in Hebrew Bet Arbat HaMerchavim, the four-quarter home. It had a patio, so you can raise domestic animals, maybe a nice goat, so you can have goat milk, chicken for eggs, comes handy in times like this when there's shortage of fresh product. And that's how people typically lived. And we did find in the city of David these typical Israelite houses known as the four-quarter house, okay? And you can notice that this house is mainly built out of stone. But if you have a sharp observation, you can see there's an actual wooden beam. And the wooden beam here is what we found in Area G in the city of David, known as the burned room. And in the burned room, we found there an actual charcoal wooden beam from the fire destruction. And now we have something interesting, because you take this wooden beam and you send it to the lab. Now the lab doesn't know what results you're expecting to hear. The lab runs a lab test. And in this lab test, the result and the answer, carbon-14 dating is not very accurate, but it gives you 20, 30 years pretty much range. And the lab result of dating that chocolate wooden beam was from the early 6th century BCE. Now that's very interesting. Why? Because we all know what happened in the early 6th century BC or BCE. Let's go to the Bible. And we know that this was in the year 586 BC, is when the Babylonians came and burned the temple. It is from the book of Jeremiah, chapter 52, about Nebuchadnezzar, the master of the guard of King Nebuchadnezzar, and he burned the house of the Lord and the king's house and all the house of Jerusalem, even every great man's house, burned he with fire. So we have a description here of the actual destruction of the first temple, the temple built by Solomon, but not just the temple and the palace originally of King David, now used by King Zedekiah, and every great man's house burned he with fire. And we find these chocolate wooden beams dating to the exact same year where we know historically when the Babylonians came and destroyed the temple and the palace and the houses in Jerusalem and smashed the walls. There's another magnificent example of the correlation between the actual physical artifacts found in the ground and scripture, biblical scripture, okay? Now, when we talk about the destruction of the temple, first temple was destroyed in 586 BC on 9th of Av, the summer of that year, on the Hebrew month of Av, on the 9th day. Jumping ahead, even though it's not biblical, the second temple was destroyed by the Romans also in the summer, 600 years later, but that was already in the first century, the year 70, but in the exact same date, in the date of the year 70, but 9th of Av. And that's where we commemorate and we mourn both destructions of both temples in the same date, which today is a fast day. That's also, by the way, we talked about in this lecture, the same date that the spies made their sin, and that's why they spent 40 years in the desert. So the spies sinned, first and second temple were destroyed in 9th of Av. Even though this is a little bit out of scripture, we're talking about the second temple, but it's very, very much related to framing this lecture in the chronological layout, as I referred to in the beginning. This is a coin that the Romans mended because they were so happy and so proud of their destruction of the small province in their large empire called Judea, that they actually immortalized this by putting it on a coin. It says Judea capta. Judea is captured. As you can see, a woman sitting, holding her head behind a date tree, which is a symbol of Judah, and a Roman soldier standing behind it, and the seal of the Roman Senate. The amazing thing is that 2,000 years later, the State of Israel was built. In the 10th year anniversary, when the State of Israel was only 10 years old, the Israeli government mended coins, and this is the coin they mended. Look at this picture, and it says, Asor Lechirut Yisrael. Okay, so Israel liberated, 1948. If this is Judea capta, Judea is captured, here you have Israel liberated, 1948. Look at this optimistic level, which we're finishing with. A woman holding her baby, for continuity, the highest birth rate in the Western world, someone planting a tree for the continuity. Where are the Romans that thought that they destroyed the Jewish people? And where are the Jewish people today? In the 1967, this is where we're ending our lecture with. In 1967, on June 7th, the third day of the war starts on June 5th, is when the Jerusalem Brigade, under the command of Mordechai Motagur, is now sitting on the Mount of Olives, east of Jerusalem, when they see the Temple Mount from the east, the Dome of the Rock, the exact location where the first and second temple were located in. And that's where Motagur says, we have his recording on the military radio, אנחנו יושבים על הרכס שצופה על העיר העתיקה, ועוד מעט אנחנו הולכים להיכנס אליה. We're sitting on the ridge overlooking the old city, and soon we're about to enter it. And then you hear on the radio, Har Habayit Be'adenu, the Temple Mount is in our hands. So we covered 3,700 years of biblical history from Abraham. I apologize about the technical difficulties in the beginning. The app kept on crashing, so my sincere apologize for that. But we're ending on a positive note. Jerusalem is united. We just celebrated Jerusalem Reunification Day a few days ago, where the Eve of Shavuot. This is Mount of Olives looking from the east. Sachi knows this place very well. And just to end off in a picture of the prophecy that took place that I had in the book of Zechariah. I was standing there with a group of pastors, and they were holding me in the book of Zechariah, chapter 8, and many nations should come and seek the Lord of hosts in Jerusalem. And they were holding me, 10 people from many nations. Those say the Lord of hosts, and those days should come to pass. The 10 men shall take hold of all the languages, and they should hold the skirt of one who is a Jew. They will say they will go with you, as we heard, that God is with you. Prophecy is fulfilled in this land. This is an amazing thing. I hope you enjoyed this lecture. This is a new topic altogether, which hopefully we'll talk about the Ark of the Covenant. Thank you very much, guys. Wishing you happy Shavuot, happy Pentecost. Again, apologies for the technical difficulties in the beginning. Hope you enjoyed the lecture. Peace on to you from Jerusalem. Enjoy. Shavuot Sameach, Chag Sameach. Bye-bye. Mariel. מה? לא עכשיו, לא.